I can't imagine a better tee-up for our conversation than what we've heard this morning. First of all, Amir got us all fired up about the fact that what we all thought was some distant point in the future is actually much closer than we think, if not here already. So it's really time to get moving down the 12 steps. Let's get past anger and denial and get into this in a meaningful way. And then Secretary Work gave us just a historical tour de force, right? And it's really good to know that everything that we're thinking about is founded on a Star Trek episode too, which it's always comforting as well. Now we're going to bring it in much more close, and we're privileged really to have Dr. Bill Streilein here with us, who is the Chief Technology Officer at the Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office in OSD. And having seen the visionary demonstrations this morning, the pitches that we've got, many of you, if you're like me, are asking, okay, so what are the next steps, right? What do I do? What can I do next to kind of get started down this road? And this is, I think, where Dr. Streilein is really focused by virtue of his role in CDAO. And so he comes from a super distinguished, he's perfectly qualified for this job. By virtue of his time at the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, and then before that, decades of time at the MIT's Lincoln Laboratory there, working in AI. So it's a real pleasure, Bill, to be here with
Glad
you.
To be here.
And maybe just start by giving us a sense of your new office. You just sort of passed your 1-year anniversary, stood up in February of last year. It's a new and it's kind of a different office, but I'll leave you to describe it.
Yeah.
Could you just give us a sense of it?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, and I love following the previous presentations that do really set the stage for AI. So I'll give you a brief overview of CDAO, where it came from, and what our mission and focus is here. So the CDAO was formed from the Joint AI Center, the JAIC, the Chief Data Office, the Advana Business Analytics Platform, and then also the Defense Digital Services, which is sort of like a rebel force within the department and able to accomplish things very quickly in the digital space. So those 4 organizations have come together to form CDAO, and actually the day I started was the day the CDAO was announced, its initial operating capability, so I've gotten to see it really, as they say, storm, norm, and form, or storm, form, and norm over time.
All that stuff.
But I'm really glad to be a part of that. So I would say, I have some slides here to sort of motivate how the CDAO was stood up. But the first slide here, this is how I usually do it, nowhere near as well as Bob Work did, but we're in a competition that we need to basically not lose and prevail. If you go to the next slide, this is how I think about our role in CDAO, which is the adoption of AI across the DoD. It's a very simple graphic, but I think if you can't explain it simply, then maybe you don't fully understand it. And what I'm doing here is sort of comparing the need for adoption along the y-axis vertically with the space of concern for the DoD, which is from enterprise through operations over to warfighting. And you'll notice I've drawn with my purple crayon this frontier. It's an assessment of where we are right now with the adoption of AI. We see more AI in the enterprise space than we do in the warfighter. And that's a number of reasons for that we are working actively to try to address. So CDAO was formed to address these challenges, specifically to lead and oversee the creation of strategic development and policy, to break down barriers that are in our way for adoption of AI, to create enabling digital infrastructure, and then selectively scale AI that we've proven. And in this last year, there's been a lot of new AI that we have to work to try to improve. So, and if you go one more slide, these are some of the impediments that we have to address. Inaccessible data, lack of AI trust and even understanding, challenges with archaic acquisition processes that make it difficult to bring in this innovation capability, siloed or fragmented capabilities across the department, and finally, just the technical domain challenges themselves. But if you hit the next bar, you'll see we've got a number of arrows in our quiver that enable us to push back against this and make progress. Those were mentioned on the previous slide, but I'll focus on a couple of them, specifically data. And so one of our main focus areas is focusing on enabling the department to leverage its data in support of analytics and AI. So I'll stop there and continue the discussion.
No, that's great. Maybe you could give the team, okay, I want to do some work with CDAO, And when you say that, I mean, one of the things that I think is great about CDAO is that rather than be this bureaucratic, thing, you're actually much more kinetic, right? You
Yes.
do things, right? So what would be your advice to someone who might want to, engage with your team and get some stuff done?
That's a great question. So the CDAO actually is a 4-star organization that is a PSA, Principal Staff Assistant, reports directly to the deputy. And we're what is known as a doing PSA, as you say. Not just putting out policy, but actually creating capabilities, enabling others to create capabilities. And so we have a number of mechanisms for people to engage with us. Within the department, we aim to provide services, both technical and non-technical, that enable folks to organically leverage and bring AI to their warfighting missions. But then also from the vendor space, we have new mechanisms that enable engagement, much faster mechanisms to enable new capabilities to be tried against DoD data and shown as prototypes. Other transaction authorities enable that, or other transaction agreements before they turn into big programs. If you have any questions, we are accessible. AI.mil is our website, and you can definitely reach out to us, and we would love to engage.
So there you go. In terms of next steps, that's one of the very meaningful next steps you can take. Bill, I really like this slide because with respect to the adoption of AI, all of those orange arrows that are pushing down, we can kind of consider those tearing down forces, those forces that are fighting against the adoption of AI. And your blue arrows are pushing back. Those are the building up forces. And I'd like to just focus on the matter of trust, right? Which I think is one of the major tearing down forces, if you will, is
Yes.
the trusting in this thing. And I've got to say that when I listen to Bob Work's pitch, when I think about an algorithm that's going to feed an algorithm that's going to feed an algorithm, I just wonder about the inherent stability of a system like that. Could you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That is, in fact, one of the main areas we focus on. The DoD was the first military force to put out responsible or ethical principles of AI, sort of leading the way for the world about how to leverage AI for good, if you will. And if you haven't seen the memo, I encourage you to go find it. But basically, there's 5 key principles to this. I remember it. There's responsibility, there's equitability, governance, and traceability, finally. But basically, these principles enable you. The goal is that any use of AI will adhere to these principles so that they're used in a way that protects our values, but also in a way that enables us to trust them, if you will. Now, there's more than words. You have to have something quantitative behind it to enable you to say that you trust this capability. So that work is actually within our AI Assurance Directorate within CDAO. And one of the ways, we actually don't use the word trust because we think that is a term that is best suited for people to people, but we replace it with a word called justified confidence, or a couple of words. And the idea is that we're going to use, through experimentation and testing, we'll have arguments along with evidence that give us the justified confidence that the capability will be able to be leveraged in whatever scenario we want. And that is a core part of any capability that we want to bring, is that we have justified confidence.
Okay, justified confidence is kind of trust for AI. Then.
It's basically right.
Okay,
That's
great.
right.
It seems also that, we could almost use software, if not artificial intelligence, to kind of monitor the output of these algorithms, kind of a real-time test and retest capability that would ensure that whatever this algorithm is putting out is staying between some sort of guardrails. And it doesn't surprise me either that we're seeing more adoption at the enterprise level, because those things are closer to home.
Yep.
A lot of times they're describing processes that we know a lot about, and so when we check the output of the algorithm at the artificial intelligence, that justified confidence builds a little bit faster. When you get out at the more forward, more in the much more dynamic warfighting, we still got work to do there, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. That's where I'd like to bring in this notion of experimentation. I mentioned it under justified confidence.
Yeah.
But I mean, in the wake of these great advances, I agree, LLMs, large language models, generative AI is fundamentally transforming. But we don't quite know how to leverage it. I think there's a lot of simple use cases, and it's a very natural interface. But there's a lot to be done to ground the model so that the output can be trusted. And that will happen not because we've set the foundation necessarily and now it's ready to go, but by experimenting with it, really putting it through its paces, understanding it, controlling the data that it's trained on so that you know and are more assured of its resources that it leveraged. And some of the novel ways that we want to apply it, I think, are going to be found through experimentation within the DoD.
I couldn't agree with you more. And Bob talked about a couple of examples in our past. And I would have to say that one thing that really characterized those periods in history just prior to a revolution was a really rich period of prototyping, experimentation, wargaming, what have you. And when we talk about things like divest, invest, boy, I'd really like to have a lot more confidence that the things that we're investing in have been proven out through experimentation and wargaming, et cetera, that you talk about. Do you want to say anything more about data quality and kind of your focus on the quality? You subsume that data office, right?
That's right.
So big emphasis on that.
Data office. So that's a great point. So one of the ways that we're moving forward, obviously there's a lot of work to do here. There's a number of challenges. And we've organized ourselves around 5 key priorities, or 5 big plays, if you will, that we're going to be executing in what Bob Burke indicated was the long game. And those big plays, 3 of them are foundational and 2 of them are more manifestations or demonstrations of these foundational capabilities making progress. The first is data quality. So it is the most important thing for the department to be able to leverage its data. And so to be able to do that, we want to make it visible, accessible, understandable, linked to other data sources, trusted, interoperable, and secure. And I spelled out an acronym known as VALTIS, which is what we use to describe data that is of high quality. So if we can make the department's data VALTIS, we can leverage it in analytics, but also in AI. And so data quality is one of our main big plays. The second big play, the one that I focus a lot on, is what we call AI/ML scaffolding. And in general, it's everything but the model. There is not this feeling within our office. And I think it's borne out because there's a lot of upskilling and growing the department has to do, that we will build our own models at a large scale. The department just doesn't have the skill set, it doesn't have the infrastructure to do that. So we need partners. We need partners outside of the department to do that. And the scaffolding that we're building in CDAO will basically form the structure around which we can enable those models to come in. And when they do come in, we mentioned the responsible AI, they'll be vetted, they'll be tested, and we'll have justified confidence. And then the third big play that's foundational is talent management. So while we're executing this scaffolding, we will be upskilling the department to get people more, have them understand AI, for what it can do in their jobs. And it doesn't mean everyone has to have a PhD, but they have to understand how transformational this is across the complete life cycle. And then quickly, the 2 sort of demonstrations of the efforts of the foundational big plays are business metrics. The deputy specifically asked for our office to oversee metrics that help understand how the PSAs are doing with their business objectives, and then also JADC2, the Joint All-Domain Command and Control. So those efforts and the foundation will be borne out in those demonstration capabilities.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Hey, just a heads up for the team here, the crowd. I'm going to run out of airspeed here in about 2 more questions. And so with the remaining time, we're going to go to you. And we're really interested in hearing what questions might be on your mind. So if you've got one forming, that's great. If you don't, get one forming, okay? All right.
Ask ChatGPT for one, maybe.
Or you could ask ChatGPT, what the heck. Hey, what I'd like to do maybe is just come back to this ethical thing. And one thing that I think we have to make sure that we leave this time machine event with is a sense of urgency, right? And I think both of the discussions that we've had leading up to this one have pointed out that we're not the only ones in this game. It is actually a competition. And some of the competitors have a different foundational approach to ethics than we do. I just use my own community in the Navy, the submarine force. This is an area where we got it completely wrong in between World War I and World War II. And we kind of trained ourselves to be this sort of benign scout force. We would report back to the main battle group what we saw, and they would come in and do the chivalrous thing, with surface forces. And it's much like today. A submariner was just sort of a wafer-thin difference above a pirate, right? It was the way it was looked at, and that all was great until Pearl Harbor, and then on that day, the order came out: hey, execute unrestricted submarine warfare against the Empire of Japan. And because we had not trained anything close to that, a bunch of, the whole entire submarine force looked at that and said, what is this? We have no idea. So my point being that once you take that, it's like Mike Tyson said, right? Everybody's got a strategy until you get punched in the face. And it's sort of the same thing with ethics. Yeah. Everybody has an ethical structure until you get punched in the face. How do you guard us against, getting punched in the face and not knowing what the next steps are with respect to it?
I think the way we do it is we're not thinking about it before, right when we're punched in the face. We think about it continuously. There's a couple of things I would say to respond to that. First off, I like the way you said it, that it is definitely a competition. I actually like to think of it like alien tech from there's been some discussions of movies. A piece of incredible technology has appeared on our front lawn, and it can do things, and we want to understand it. These things are black boxes, so it's really hard to know what they do. But the technology is also shown up in the competitor's front lawn as well.
Yeah.
And whoever can figure it out first and leverage it, takes the advantage, if you will.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say is that we don't think about deploying AI as a thing, as a prepackaged capability. It's more about pipelines, and that scaffolding I mentioned really enables a pipeline.
Yeah.
And so if you think about it as a continuously developed, trained, updated, sustained capability that you're leveraging, all the time, you can put the ethical questions or the bias questions basically inside that pipeline to continuously validate it. Mm-hmm. And that comes from looking at the data to make sure there's no bias there for protected classes or something you're looking at.
Right.
Make sure that when the algorithm's trained, it doesn't do something you don't want it to. And then when it's in operations, you can monitor it. And then if it does go off the rails, you've got a process in place because you're continuously updating it.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
our approach.
All right. Okay, that's fair enough. I want to just kind of continue this idea of competition and the value of time. Right, kind of being first to market with some of these ideas. Yeah. And so if I was one of the audience and I was interested in kind of where is that market, where can I accelerate, how do you see your office enabling the adoption of AI? Where would you recommend, are sort of the rich areas to get involved with right now to get that speed to market?
Yeah, so I think our priorities, the key big plays that we've mentioned are really our focus areas. Yeah. So in contrast to some of the previous organizations, specifically the JAIC from which we were formed, we are not an office with, we have funds, but those funds are there to enable AI to be adopted, not to necessarily be given out sort of like come and pitch us a program and we'll fund it.
Okay.
That may have been, and it was the good thing to do at the time, but since the JAIC was stood up in 2018 or 17, things have changed. AI is now basically, the models themselves are commoditized, and we can do it. So the approach has to be different. But we need help with data. We definitely need help understanding techniques to find it, to leverage it. And the most important part from an AI perspective is labeling it. That is one of the major challenges we have from an AI perspective. We need to be able to truth mark the data to know for the particular problem you're going to use it for, whether or not what you're looking for instance, if it's object detection, is present or not. That is something that our adversaries are working very hard on as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned sort of the structures of the different countries and their political systems. Authoritarian countries can just mandate thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of people do labeling 24 hours a day or however many. We can't do that here. We need to leverage people in a way that doesn't break spirits, but actually gets us moving. And I think there's a real role for automated labeling as well, under the right circumstances. So that's one. And then also from the scaffolding perspective, we need ideas that help us figure out how to set up that pipeline and framework.
Okay. All right. So for everybody looking to take the next steps, you've heard where they're looking for. You mentioned ChatGPT. I'm just going to open that up. It's on everybody's mind.
Yeah.
AGI, ASI. How's your office approaching that? What's going on with that?
We're practicing what we preach, and so the goal is we're setting up experiments to understand how this capability could be leveraged. Okay. We're finding specific scenarios in which a capability like this that can take in a bunch of data and generate potential courses of action could be vetted, could be used. We're not thinking about putting it in a scenario where there's no human in the loop. Mm-hmm. Definitely has to be a part of it. And through this experimentation, we hope to find specific use cases where we can leverage it as the technology continues to improve. And they become grounded. By grounded, I mean the results it gives you, the facts that it reports are correct so that you can trust them. I actually like to think of them less as information retrieval tools and concept retrieval tools. They are statistics at scale, but they're at a scale that enables them basically to understand the latent concepts in the data, and that is actually how they're able to generate data. You know, when you think about people communicating, we often use the wrong words, but you get a sense if you've got the concept right? That's the same way we should treat this. And so I use it all the time just to sort of tear apart different concepts and projects and to learn. And so our goal is to, through experimentation, give recommendations for how to use it, and we're absolutely listening to folks about ideas they'd like to experiment with as well.
Great. I mean, it's so new that everybody's kind of got their favorite wow story with respect to ChatGPT and what it's been able to do. Are you comfortable with the pace of that process, and not only with ChatGPT and AGI, but the rest of it?
Yeah, so I'll just say I don't think AGI is around the corner.
Yeah.
My own personal opinion is I think that these capabilities are impressive, but I don't think they are artificial general intelligence. I think I don't know where that's coming. I think you know, I read this really great article recently. I think it was in the New Yorker magazine about mythologizing AI. Yeah. You know, there's this sort of feeling like AGI is around the corner. Is this it?
Right.
And when you do that, you fail to really see it for what it is, which means it's a capability that you could develop metrics for and develop justified confidence in. So I would encourage folks when they think about this is to really look at it critically, and don't give it the benefit of the doubt, because it won't do you any good if you do. You will be fooled by it. But it is useful, and if you can find a use for it, then more power to you. But it's got to be one, I think, that you confirm the results. And in the end, you are responsible for what you do based on it. Yeah. So it doesn't do any good to say that your AGI told you something.
That's right, yeah, it's not my fault.
That's not my fault.
ChatGPT
Right.
did it.
That's
yeah.
right.
Okay, good. Hey, questions from the audience. Let's go out and, yeah, right over here.
I think we all understand that this is not just a tool, it's potentially an existential crisis. The downside of getting this wrong is perilous. And yet there's a key constituent we haven't spent much, if any time, in conversations like this talking about, and that is the legislative branch of government. You get the sense that they know that this is imminent, this is something that they need to regulate, and it's also something that they simply don't understand it. How do you plan on bringing along that powerful, important constituent, and how they can actually do their job to regulate this technology? Yeah,
so that's a great question. You know, one of our roles is, I think it's the second arrow there, captured in there in a sense, bringing everybody up to speed for what this means. And it will be changing, so our ability to educate people at the right level for what this technology really means for the job that they're doing will help them understand that that they have the ability to get a handle on it. Like I said, you don't have to have a PhD to understand what the implications are, but you do have to think critically when it comes to this. So that, you know, not mythologizing it is one of the big things. I also think that it's really important within the 5 principal ethics to have transparency. It's called traceability, but another thing that I like to say is transparency. And the more that we can do to uncover, if you will, break up into system or components of an AI system, the better we have a chance for understanding how the different mechanisms for its output move along its process for pushing something. And that supports the legislative process for understanding the provenance of an output or something like that. We don't want to be in a situation, although, you know, we're heading this way, because the models keep getting bigger, which you just put more and more in, and all of a sudden magic pops out. We want to be able to separate it and understand it, analyze it. And that's one of our main approaches, is to think it through. We do have a really good ace in our hole, if you will. There's another chart that I show which talks about if the DoD is going to leverage this, how can we do this? How can we do this for competitive advantage? And we understand our mission better than anybody. That's something that everyone in the military is trained. I was not in the military, whoops, excuse me. But that is like the bread and butter for everyone in there. And from that understanding is an awareness and capacity to know how this capability could come in to inform it. And with that, we're able to basically assess something new, this alien tech that showed up, and then leverage it in the best way.
Yeah, if I could just sort of pile onto that, with respect to the education responsibility is what we really have here. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine, as Amir said, a more powerful group than the one that's in this room right now, a more knowledgeable group with respect to AI and the matters that we're talking about. And you know, to your point, you get outside this room and that knowledge level can drop off perhaps precipitously, even when it comes to people who have their responsibilities to govern and regulate these things. So, you know, it's just our reality, right? We've got a responsibility, all of us in here, I think, an educational responsibility to get out and bring this up. Not mythologizing it, not make this seem like it's black magic. There are analogies that can make this much more clear. But we've got to get busy in that regard. Otherwise, that gap just continues to widen that you point out. And that's not helpful for anybody. So, you know, oftentimes when I was briefing or testifying before Congress, if there was a gap in knowledge or there was somebody who wasn't understanding, that was on me to close that gap, right? And so I hope we all feel that as well, to just sort of build up the knowledge base across society and all those elements of society that have different responsibilities than just sort of the generation of technology. So, okay. I'm going to try maybe go over here. How about one of our partners and allies? Anybody want to ask a question? If not, I'll ask one on your behalf. Do you have anything on your mind?
Hi, good morning. Brigadier Edward from Singapore. Yes, I'd like to understand, how do you see from a partnership point of view, where do you think partners like Singapore can support US in this effort to really spread the word out there to really bring the partners on board this journey towards a probably AI-enabled partnership?
Yeah, great.
Partnerships are extremely important to us. As you were saying, this isn't something we're going to do alone. It's certainly not something that we want to do alone, because it's a capability that affects everybody. And via the partnerships, we have strong partnerships, but obviously with industry, but also internationally. We can find different use cases, we can find different ways and sort of come to a common understanding for how the capability can be leveraged. So partnerships that support joint exercises, putting together common frameworks for thinking about it, that's actually one of the first ways. I mentioned the DoD putting out the ethical principles, and those have resonated with others. And you know, they have their own spin on them based on the country they come from, but in general, there's protection of personal liberties and an understanding that we need to monitor this capability and be responsible in it. So that partnerships are core to what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think also, particularly with respect to Singapore, which I just was so happy to partner with all the time as the chief of our Navy, we have so much to learn from you, right, with respect to, and all of our partners really, with respect to kind of that perspective. You know, those different perspectives just really inform our approach, make it much more strong, much more resilient. I remember we were working with my counterpart in the Singapore Navy to try and find the appropriate dates for a maritime conference the next year. And just so quickly, they said, okay, well, you know, here are the Christian holidays, here are the Muslim holidays, here are the Jewish holidays. They just boom, boom, okay, so these are the only 2 remaining days left in the year that we can hold this. It's like, okay, well, I guess that's that, you know? But it was just so instinctive for you to just rip through those because your population is so diverse there. It was really a delight. Okay, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
In countries with, high ethical standards, it might be easier to enforce, but because of the variety of ethical standards in different countries, how can it be enforced in other countries, and really reflecting on some of the statements that you made early on. And then I just had a second question. What do you think that chart is going to look like in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and in 20 years? Thank you.
I'll answer the second one first, because that's an easier question.
It's the famous 2-part question.
Yeah, right. So on this chart, the dotted red line is the adversaries, purple crayon, but it's red because they're the adversary. And so when I first drew this chart, without the arrows there, the question is what's the remit of the CDAO? Is it supposed to be all the way in the upper right? Then everything is AI? I don't think that's the answer. But more immediately, we have to be beyond the dotted line. And so I hope that over time, and there's another chart that shows this progressing as we do a good job, hopefully, and I'm confident we will, in developing infrastructure that is federated across the department and enables scaling of AI, that will emphasize the warfighter side and initially with use cases, but then those use cases will be able to learn from them and leverage what we've learned to sort of offer more uniform solutions to the warfighter side, and that side will pick up. I think the enterprise side will continue to grow, but it's really this side that needs to move most urgently, I would say. And it'll be through experimentation and help with vendors and other folks who've developed great capabilities that can demonstrate it there. So the first part of your question was about the policy with regards to ethics in different countries, is that? So I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I will say that that is probably the existential part of this competition, is that if we don't win, then the standards, the ways of doing things will not be ones that we subscribe to. And so yeah, I don't know. I'm not a war theorist, so I don't know what to do if there are no holds barred by the adversary and will use the capability in any way they want. We won't do that. I will say from a technical perspective, there have been studies, and I've done some myself, that show, for instance, that an algorithm that is trained in an ethical, robust way, when I mean robust, I mean you've given it adversarial examples in its training data, it actually performs better. It's more robust. And that means that when you put such an algorithm into operations, it is less subject to failing when it encounters something it hasn't seen before or something the adversary puts in place specifically to impair it. And that actually may be very useful. If they don't follow the ethical standards and don't try to do this extenuous testing on it, there may be more vulnerability there that would be an advantage for us. But that's a technical answer to it.
Do you have a quick one? Quick question, all right.
Overall, in an AI project, you spend more than half the time just getting data, clean data, accessible data. Do you have a timeline on how that will happen? Do you have to wait for all those things to happen on the top 5, or can you just have the first one done and we can get the access to data?
We're prioritizing it. We don't think that we're going to get one of them done and then the next. We're doing all of these in parallel. With like 300 or so people at the organization and lots of help from partners. From the data accessibility thing, that is our #1 priority, because we believe that if we can, my boss, Dr. Craig Martell, who's the CDAO himself, likes to say, if you can get 15 to 20% of the data visible and accessible, then you may be able to get 50 to 60% of the bang out of that, impact from that. And I think that's really true, because there are commonalities, especially in the enterprise space, for that data. But if we start to realize that in the warfighter space, things like common views of geospatially and things like that, getting that data can really, it sort of feeds on itself and multiplies. And I will just say a plug. Our mechanism for making data accessible and visible is this concept known as a data mesh. And the idea with a mesh is not to bring all the data together in one place so it's centralized, which can work, but doesn't work with the DoD's data. The 4 principles are of a mesh, and if you haven't heard about this, there's this great book, a short O'Reilly book. Leave the data where it is, but make it visible and sort of self-service accessible. Assign data product managers who are responsible for treating their data as not just an asset, but as a product which customers leverage. And that's really important, because then people are responsible for making sure it's high quality. Having federated governance so that APIs and patterns of that data are understood everywhere. And I think that, I can't remember the 4th one. Anyways, leave it where it is, but there's 4 pillars there. But that's our main mechanism we're pushing on. Thank you for the question.
Absolutely fantastic. So if you're interested in what to do next to reach that visionary future that both Amir and Secretary Work put out, I think that Dr. Streilein has given us a really good sense of that, right? So data, very important to get to work in there. Experimentation, right? Very important in terms of trialing these things out. Dr. Streilein, thanks very much for coming on down and spending some time with us. You're a super busy guy. Let's give it up for our guest here.